Hello and welcome, everyone. We're going to just wait a few minutes to allow our attendees to come in, but I'm so delighted to be hosting this event called the Mapmakers Alumni Institute. We'll just wait about 1 or 2 minutes before we start. Okay, that's enough time. 1 minute. Well, welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Korb. I am the director of the Pacific University MFA in Writing program, and I am here to welcome you to a regular event within our winter and summer residencies in the MFA, the Mapmakers Alumni Institute, which is designed to support the ongoing work of our alumni who have come through the program, who have also been awarded the Kwame Dawes Mapmaker Scholarship, which is a scholarship we offer for writers of color in the program. And I'm so pleased to introduce Angela Wang, who will be leading this session with us today. She has invited two funny women, Imig and Allison, Ellis, to talk on the subject of "It's funny because it's mostly true." I will offer a brief introduction or bio for Angela, and then I will turn the floor over and sit back and enjoy this conversation for myself too. So, a graduate of our MFA in Writing program, Angela Wang was the recipient, as I said, of the Kwame Dawes Mapmaker Scholarship. Her thesis was titled "The Graveyard Tours," which included the critical essay, "A Death in the Family." She currently resides in Seattle with her family. Well, Angela, I can't thank you enough. Anne, Allison, thank you both so much. And Angela, please take it away.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for hosting this event and helping to make this event happen, and for all of you for tuning in. I'd like to introduce my friends, Allison Ellis and Anne Imig. Allison Ellis's work touches on themes of death, grief, buried family secrets, shape-shifting, identities, and other misfortunes, and she's as entertaining and hilarious in real life as she is on the page. Allison's work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Amazon Original Stories, Assay, Fourth Genre, The Rumpus, Barzak, and elsewhere, and her memoir in progress was awarded the 2021 First Pages Prize, Sandra Carpenter Prize for Creative Nonfiction. Allison holds an MFA from Bennington Writing Seminars and a BA in American Studies from Smith College, and teaches creative writing both independently and at Hugo House in Seattle. Anne Imig is the founder and director of the National Live Reading Tour, Listen to Your Mother, a nationwide storytelling series. Listen to Your Mother continues to give motherhood a microphone on stages all over the country. Anne edited the 2015 anthology, Listen to Your Mother, What She Said Then, What We're Saying Now from Putnam, and her writing has been featured on College Humor, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, The Huffington Post, and The Washington Post. Her blog, anneimig.com, formerly known as Anne's Rants, has won numerous awards. Anne holds a BA in theater and a master's in social work, as well as a certification in positive psychology coaching, and she's also just launched a new podcast. It's pronounced Memoir, at Memoir Podcast. So please welcome my friends, Allison and Anne. We'll first start with 5-minute readings from Allison and then Anne. And then next, we'll dive into our discussion, and we'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions at the conclusion of our session. So please feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A portion of the webcast, and we'll help to moderate them at the end. So take it away, Allison.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for letting me be here. I'm going to read a memoir excerpt. The only thing you really need to know, the memoir hinges around the death of my first husband, which happened about 20 years ago. And this scene starts, it's about 2 days after his death. I have returned back to my childhood home. And Greg is the name of the husband, and he has kind of come back from the dead as a ghost. Okay. First, you had all kinds of questions and asides about the swimming medals I'd stored behind the shoe boxes behind the sweaters. Then it was all the cute things Lizzie had done that day that I hadn't seen because I'd been on the phone for hours. And then my mom barged in without knocking, like she'd always done, and my spirits landed with a thud. Uh-oh, you said. You're in trouble now. My mother's hair was a wild nest of curlicues standing on end, and the list in her hands was sprawling 4 or 5 pages with multiple taped on tentacles. More people to call, the obituary to write, the memorial service to plan. I'll be back later, he whispered in my ear, as if my mom were staring you down. I'm going to go check in on my dad. He's kind of a mess right now. I looked up at my mother's massive figure in the doorway. Greg's friends are calling. They want a place to gather, she said, hands on hips. I told them to come here. I tried to focus on my mom, but all I saw was one gigantic list. Aside from the few precious moments I'd been able to steal away in the bathroom, most of my time had been spent following her marching orders. I'd already taken care of the inner circle, calling all of your closest friends, but had not yet made a dent in the outer circle, notifying work colleagues, college friends, and former neighbors. Now the circles were colliding. Couldn't we just tell them to wait? Nope, sorry, grief doesn't wait. It comes for you like a monster in the form of your widowed mother, causing a dark cosmic shadow across the worn and matted mustard yellow carpet of your childhood bedroom. The next evening, my mother's house was filled with an overwhelming 30 to 40 of your closest friends. The ones who had known you for at least 20 years, dating back to before college, including old girlfriends.com colleagues and drinking buddies. There was Kelly, who ran with you just hours before you died, along with her newish boyfriend, an Ironman triathlete / Boeing engineer named Tim. Avold, your best friend, tall and brooding, chain smoking on the back deck. Avold's wife, Mako. Avold's ex-girlfriend, Tanya. Tanya's sorority sisters, Gail and Lynn. Gail, who was married to Rich. Rich, who was the older brother of Lynn. Lynn, who was married to one of your closest confidants, Walt, plus their kids. All of you had lived together at various different points in that crumbling house behind Food Giant in Wallingford. It occurred to me much too late how messy my mother's house was and how terrible it must have looked, but nobody cared. They hugged me anyway. They brought food. They cleaned Mom's kitchen, put stuff away as best they could, and set out snacks, drinks, desserts, and plenty of beer. It felt like a Greg kind of party. Though none of us could see you, I knew you were there somewhere in the crowd, leaning against the kitchen counter with an imaginary microbrew in your hand, tilting your head back and laughing about the good times you and your friends enjoyed when you were still alive. At some point, Lizzie needed a feeding and a diaper change, so I went upstairs to my mother's room, climbed up onto her king-size bed, and adjusted a jumble of pillows behind my back as I pulled Lizzie to my chest. Mom sat a few feet away from me at her vanity. She still had one of those light-up plug-in mirrors from the 1980s with the interchangeable mood light settings, office, evening, daytime, and it was turned to the greenish-blue office setting. Mom had always said, put your makeup on in the worst possible light, otherwise you'll never know how bad you really look. The light made a high-pitched humming sound. It's weird having all these people here I'll probably never see again, I said, staring out over the lake. The sun was beginning to descend through the clouds, casting filtered rays of light across the water. I imagine you were taking the shape of one of those rays, and I looked for your profile in the way a child might look for a smiley face or a hippopotamus among the clouds. What do you mean? She asked, one eye on her mirror and the other toward me. Mom drew in her eyebrows with a greasy brown Maybelline pencil. Something about it didn't look right, but I didn't dare tell her that. I looked down. Lizzie had fallen asleep, red-cheeked and punch-drunk, with my nipple resting on her lower lip. I readjusted the pillows around me, jostling her to wake her up. Nothing about this new situation seemed to be rattling her. Her father was gone, but she still had me overfeeding her, so all was good. I used my dirty shirt to wipe up the corners of her mouth, then lifted her up and plopped her on the other side of my lap for an even feeding. They're Greg's friends, I said. I mean, they'll be nice to me for a while, but then they're going to move on with their own lives. You don't know that, Mom said, both eyes on her mirror. Yeah, your voice echoed inside my head. Shut up. My friends love you. Mom focused on the other eyebrow now, using tiny flicks of her hand to simulate hairs where none existed, going higher above her natural brow line. It was useless. Lizzie was fast asleep. I placed my breast back inside my bra and pulled my shirt down over my stomach, the same shirt from the day before. I turned to look at her. You never stayed friends with anyone after Dad died. And you never dated or got remarried. You never even tried. Mom didn't look at me, but instead tossed the eyebrow pencil into her vanity drawer with her other assortment of eyebrow pencils and shoved it shut. That was my choice, she spat, then pushed her chair back on the tile floor with a piercing squeak. Your father's friends are assholes. As for the dating, all the men my age are disgusting. You know that. I didn't disagree. I sat there for a few more minutes, though, staring out over the lake, wondering what would happen to me, which was the only real question I had. That's it.
Thank you, Allison. And I believe for Anne's reading, Scott has a video that's queued up, and that will be her reading.
Stockholm Syndrome occurs when hostages begin sympathizing with their captors. I wrote this after the first 2 weeks home full-time with my children last summer. Good morning, my sons, and thank you for waking me as soon as that pesky darkness began to lift. This is my best hour. Would you like to watch 2 hours of Pokemon episodes? Pixie stick amuse-bouche? Get naked, put on Dad's welding helmet, and spray water from the deck into the living room? I'm not even gonna make myself any coffee or do any business. I'll just get right up on that step stool and dig around in the highest cupboard because I know you just wanna see what's up there. I won't stop until I can produce those 3 remaining melon-flavored Tic Tacs from 2009. What a beautiful day. 75 degrees and sunny. Who can choose between Chuck E. Cheese, Target, and Toys R Us? We have so much to do in time for your birthdays in December and February. Let's get moon sand first, okay? And then a Wii and a DS, and maybe a new house, because are we ever even going to move, or are we just always gonna live here in the same house? We will stay until we spend hundreds of money. But first, let's ride bikes, but only if I promise you screens or candy. Before we even get to the driveway, start asking me how many circles you have to bike before you can come back in for a popsicle. And I mean red dye number 2, baby. None of that frozen juice on a stick bull schnitzel. I'm not even gonna get dressed. You definitely shouldn't either. Don't change those wet pants. In fact, how about we forget about the toilet and pee hose our way through the day? Hey, no preschool, no pee school, deal? Now, repeat after me, really loud so the church gardeners across the street can hear. Butt, A-word, nimples, S-word, middle finger, sucks, stupid, penis, I said the A-word. Time for lunch. We better get to McDonald's, and if they don't give us the right Happy Meal toy, we are totally going through that drive-thru again, players. And remember, when we get home, everyone bare butts on the stools, dirty feet on the kitchen table. Go! Okay, who wants to play my computer until sundown? Don't just type, pound, slam those keys. And if you want to turn, scream out, claw your brother, pull some hair. While I'm pouring the more juice and the more treats for dinner and chatting on the phone, please come headbutt me directly in the crotch. And yell, excuse me, Mom. I said, excuse me, Mom. Get off the phone, Mom. Fix your computer, Mom. I love that. All righty, have fun on the computer. Go ahead and click on all the sidebar ads. Sign yourself up for whatever and explore any and all pop-ups. I'm going to sleep. Meet me in my bed around midnight, okay? Just run right in full speed and send me into apoplectic shock. But not at the same time. Stagger it by about 90 minutes. Also, would someone please come and pull at my armpit stubble? Would you poke at my moles? Super. One last request. Save your pee for my bed. Nighty night.
Oh, goodness.
Great.
Thanks, Anne. So thank you for sharing your readings and your work. And I wanted to start off the discussion with the idea of balancing the truth in your nonfiction work with the humor element that just literally made us all laugh in both of your readings. And how the truth in your writing has the potential to make what could be a painful story humorous. So, I mean, maybe we can start the discussion off there, and because we're nonfiction writers, and I think that is an element that kind of makes comedy and humor work, because the audience can resonate with the truth that we're speaking in this way. So, Anne, do you want to start us off?
Oh, sure. The truth is in the details. I mean, where I found myself laughing in Allison's piece when she was talking about the swimming medal behind, back on the shelf, and the mom staring you down, like I could just picture when her newly deceased husband was alive, and that dynamic, like the more specific, the more hilarious.
Yeah, definitely. And then also like the specific instances and scenes where you painted for us in your piece also. And I mean, the headbutting and the crotch.
Those are all, those are all verbatim quotes and things that happened. And then the humor comes in, the twist, right? Of me totally buying in, like, this is something I want, instead of, it's a collection of a summer's worth forced into one day. And then when you say, like, ready for lunch, the audience isn't expecting that little twist of, like, that's just part of the day, right? And really that humor is born of exhaustion,
right.
Total lack of control, no time to even go to the bathroom, right? Like, I mean, so the details and the tension and then the twist.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, because I think we're laughing. Some of us, who are parents, can identify also with similar situations, and so we identify with kind of the frustration. I think that's really the truth of the piece, is frustration, and like how you deal with that. And you made it such a hilarious piece. So I think that's critical in making the humor part work.
And I felt that so much with Allison's piece too, the pain of, like, with grief. And when something so private is so public, and you're nursing your daughter and thinking, I'm never even going to see these people. And right now, in my biggest time of grief, I have to go and socialize with them. I really felt that too.
Yeah, Allison, what do you think about talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about just kind of this general idea of things that are, like, really painful and really horrible, because, even hesitate to say our natural instinct is to not think it's funny. Sometimes we do, and we're really embarrassed by that. There are people who just, like, laugh at terrible things that happen. But it's really like it serves as a point of connection with others. And I think this idea around, whether you're going to laugh or you cry isn't, like, that sometimes is instinctual. It's just a very human response. And then we as writers, it's our job to kind of take that pain and say, okay, like, how can I make it, if it's already funny, if I am the writer that's already kind of, like, seeing the humor in this, I think that's the task that we have moving forward, is to kind of do it through the detail, or do it through the pauses, and, kind of take some of these techniques and go with it, and there's this great quote from E.B. White. He has an essay on some remarks on humor. And he says, humorists fatten on trouble, but they make trouble pay. So you kind of go towards the trouble. And that this line between laughing and crying, you're kind of doing this dance. And if you're a writer and you're kind of doing it in a humorous way, I think you kind of always have to kind of play between those two, but then end on the light note rather than on the sad note, because then that would be tragedy and not comedy.
Yeah, Allison, was my question to you in that very powerful piece that you read, that you shared with us, was the first pass was writing the humor into that really hard, or did it kind of, like when you were writing the scene, did you layer the humor in later, or did it just kind of come out that way? Voice?
No, it was so obviously, right? When somebody dies, it's horrific. Like I was not seeing any humor anywhere. It was just the worst. And then writing, I knew I had to write about it. As writers, we approach our material. I'm like, I have to write about this because it doesn't make sense. And that particular scene I had read before, and I didn't know it was funny. So part of the process was having people say to me, well, that thing about, they really liked the mother's makeup light. The one, for those of you who are watching who know what that thing is, but it's a thing and it's noisy and it's weird. And I thought, oh, okay, tell me why that's funny. And so then we have a discussion about it. And then I think, okay, so now that's an image that is funny. That's going to provide some levity. Keep that. Don't lose that. What else is a little bit odd or different, or provide some details that kind of lighten those scenes. And then later, of course, right, we all move through the stuff we need to move through, and it's part of the writing and also the revision. Then I can kind of see, yeah, that's funny. We gain confidence in that regard. But I think it's a skill like everything else. I think it's a myth that you're either funny or you're not funny. I think we kind of have to look at our scenes and say, okay, does this lend itself towards humor? And then, work on that in revision.
Yeah, I really, really like what both of you kind of said. That number one, that humor lies in the details. And number two, it's a learned skill, right? Humor or comedy it's a skill. You practice, it's like a muscle, right? It's not like you either are funny or not. But like Allison, like your scene is basically a death scene, or a just post-death scene. And you managed to make it hilarious, not hilarious, but like very, like a lot of like human emotion that we can connect with, and you've made us laugh, like even in that time of grieving. So I think that's a huge skill, so that we can all learn, not just in nonfiction, but also in fiction and other instances, I think. So while sometimes it might be easier for us in nonfiction, do you think like people who are in other prose, like in fiction, can make this work? You can maybe amplify a lot of these similar emotions and skills to identify and connect with the reader. So I think that's brilliant. I guess on the utility of humor and craft, and you kind of touched on this, is that just because something that's both true and funny doesn't mean we have to write an essay about it, right? But so how do we harness like humor to illustrate the deeper universal truth? And I think in both of your examples, you're talking a lot about what resonates with a lot of us. It's like parenting is hard. It's frustrating. We have no control. Grieving and death is really difficult. But how do we talk about things and how do we use humor to accentuate the element of this emotional truth to show authenticity rather than something that undermines earnestness, that kind of refuses to kind of acknowledge what's going on? I mean, I think there's a fine line between that too. And do you have something to?
I think you can look at your scene or your essay and decide what you need humor to do. It can be a connection. It's a huge point of connection. It can be a repair bid between two characters. It can be the pressure release valve in a really intense essay, because people misbehave and it's funny. So you can have, people notoriously misbehave at weddings, at funerals, and sometimes it is funny in real time. I remember at my stepfather's funeral, I was weeping and I saw one of my uncles who's very funny, and I said, oh, it's just so hard to see the family together. And he goes, isn't it always? And I just laughed so hard, right? And I always remembered it. And it was a pressure relief valve for me, but you can also anticipate that for the reader. And if you're putting together a collection like the Listen to Your Mother anthology, you could, whether it's a collection or your own chapter, it's trying to kind of prevent, unless you're trying for what I would call like whiplash, emotional whiplash. Usually I'm trying to prevent that. We're trying to bring our reader along with us. And you can use humor as that pressure release valve, or a little bit of levity, or you can, take the air out of that couple who's fighting, and, the one person is just really mistreating the other, and all of a sudden they trip on a curb, right? And then you can have the character either acknowledge it, or not, whichever is funnier and helps the tension. So it's not only like looking for what's funny, but being intentional with how you're going to use it to most benefit keeping your reader with you, or the greater, mission of your work.
That's excellent. Yeah. Also, like, I think I love the idea that using humor as craft, as one tool that you're using to like tell a larger story, or to kind of take tension out of an intense scene, or kind of bring connection to the reader. And then Allison, I think we were talking a little bit before, and how like the concept that humor sits next to sadness or tragedy or even horror is interesting, because those are universal responses to stress and to tragedy and to big events. Can you maybe speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think humor, when we're looking at like the world, especially right now, I mean, things can be bad in a lot of ways, and things can be bad for us as humans, and that's part of the human experience, and that's our job as writers, is to go to those places. So in looking at like the really dark topics and how they're related, again, I think I kind of said that the balance, but like, so here's an example, right? Something terrible has happened and you're really angry. We can go there. You can take your reader there through all of that detail and get them on board with your anger. You can also take that anger and veer it in slightly. I think humor is a lot about taking something that's wrong, right? And then having an angle that's unexpected or is surprising in some way, and being intentional about that, because there's so many ways that we can write in a very conventional way that are expected of us. And then there are the readers who say, I've read that before. I've heard that story before. It's been told a certain way. And so one of the gifts of being approaching it through humor and comedy is to really just tell something different and kind of move a conversation forward that I personally believe is more can connect people. Whereas like the difference between horror plays on fears, comedy can also play on fears, but that the punchline is something where everybody's laughing, and that's your release, and it's a point of connection. We feel more together because we're laughing. If it's so horrible, you want to look away, you want to hide, you don't want to talk about it. So that's like a difference between where you kind of end up. And then again, like Anne said, we do that through various things. We do it through tone, we do it for detail. We can, do it through rant. I mean, some of these things can be really hysterical. Like you're really, really angry. Well, turn it into a rant, turn it into satire. Just do hyperbole, just take it to this like crazy. And that can be so funny and so healing, I think, because you can see the ridiculousness of it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this maybe kind of leads into the types of the comedy that we're talking about, like physical comedy, satire, sarcasm, or but like what Anne was talking about, like the whiplash, and how when you're crafting a scene, or you're writing a scene, how you kind of are using the specific tool of humor in a certain way to kind of make a point, right? To a point of connection. And how do we, as writers, like in terms of craft, we don't want to like mix up art, like have it go too much, like have too much physical comedy, like the guy trips and then like we have this profound moment. That's not going to work, right? So there's a way to put everything together. It's not necessarily an algorithm, but I mean, you have an intuitive sense of how to put the scene together, right? And do you want to speak to that a little bit about like how, too much, staying in lane. You don't want like a whiplash of like this type of comedy and then this type of comedy, or this is too much over the top. So.
Well, I think that listening to and reading other humorists, this is the way you learn, like timing and comic timing. And like any other writing, it's so important to have readers you trust who are like, okay, this dialogue is now bordering on Gilmore Girls. Like the humor is taking over and it's taken away from the character development and the tension. It's really interesting what Allison, what you were saying about horror and grief. It makes me think of Rob Delaney's heartbreaking memoir, Heart That Works. And he takes the most painful, excruciating subject, the loss of his son to childhood cancer. And believe it or not, he finds humor in the most humanizing, loving, true ways. Just a couple of examples is like, the family's in the middle of an emotional group hug, and his father-in-law, Richard, says, like, I wish it was me. Like, can't you take it from me? I wish I could take the cancer from him. And he answered, we do too, Richard. They just all cracked up, right? Like, and he specifically talks about how he and his wife would go to horror movies. This really is so resonant with what you were talking about. And they would go and just laugh. And he's like, and we knew everyone else thought we were nuts, but to see nothing could have been more grotesque than what they were experiencing in real life. And so to like, yeah, it served the same function as like a really angry rant, to have just the blood and guts and gore out there and have everyone have to experience and not just them, is a fascinating place where they found solace and humor.
Yes.
Sorry, I sort of took us back to Allison, but it was so similar that I had to say that. But
yeah, no, that's why when that leads me to like, what are some other unlikely places that we find humor? Like, I mean, we've already, we're referencing 2 death scenes and like pediatric oncology, like cancer scenes. And I mean, can you give us some other examples where you find some inspiration for where you find humor in unlikely places, maybe?
Definitely. I mean, Samantha Irby has made a career out of hilarious stories about IBS, like not funny, right? Like there is so underneath all of her essays and work is extremely not funny, horrifying, isolating health issues. And she's hilarious. So making the unsayable sayable and bringing it even farther, like let's laugh about this horror together, brings people in. So I think of her and I think of Jenny Lawson and how she's built a whole career on basically untreatable depression and finding the humor, connection, and ridiculousness about that. Those are a couple that came to mind for me.
Allison, where do you find inspiration for your humorous work?
Oh my gosh, I just have it. But Betty McDonald, since I'm on Vashon Island right now, she's so famous for the egg and I, but I read oh my God, it was the book about the pandemic. And it was like the plague. Yeah, it was called The Plague and I. And she's like stuck in the sanatorium and everyone's dying around her. It was hysterical. It was like one of the best things that I read during the pandemic, because it was like, this is her experience of just something so horrific and going in the details and the minutia. And I think there's a way, because death is not funny on its surface, but when you look at the context and us as individuals versus the horrors of the whole world, her writing does it in such a way that there's so much light there. There's light in the darkness. And I think we would all agree, no matter what we're reading, that you can take some just really horrible thing. The last panel you did, Angela, was kind of talking about tragedy plus time, which I think is so true, right? We have to have some perspective, but I don't know that it has to be a long time. Like it has taken me quite a while, because I'm writing about things that took place 20 years ago. But you can also look back on that ridiculous argument that you had with your spouse the previous night, and how the kids were like, if you're gonna play, can you shut your door next time? Like there's stuff that's funny all the time, and a little bit of looking back or a little bit of looking at a different perspective. Yeah. Angela, can I talk about the Mel Brooks quote?
Yeah, talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. So This is a pretty famous quote he talks about. He says, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger, and comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die." And it's hilarious. And I kind of was looking for like the craft talk on that. And so I was thinking a lot about like just that sentence as kind of a close read for how to think about comedy in writing, as opposed to on the screen. But I think what he's getting at is like tragedy is when I cut my finger, it's the I. It's me, it's my finger. I want to tell you about how I cut my finger. And we're like, okay, we feel really responses. Oh, I'm really sorry. That's really hard. Whatever. That's not funny. The funny thing is the you. So there's a bit of an otherness to it, right? The reason why the comedy is you fall into the open sewer. It's terrible, right? You're dead, but that's disgusting, which is a type of humor. So potty humor, anything that's just like gross, that can work really well. And then it's just unexpected and horrible. And there's distance there because we don't really know who it is and it's not us. So I thought, well, this is a neat way to kind of approach humor on the page, which is, and if you're writing, so if you're fiction, obviously you can do that through your characters. If you're writing nonfiction, well, then we have to kind of other ourselves. Which means making fun of ourselves. We can be self-deprecating, but not in a boohoo way. We have to do it in a very truthful, authentic way, and a looking back and saying, I behaved badly, or that was ridiculous, or look at the way I was seeing the world then, that was so silly. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at that quote.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're touching upon something that I think that we don't really I don't know, that we might observe as readers, but I think a lot of when we're reading different types of nonfiction or different types of essays, it's like what really draws us in is the voice of the voice of the narrator. And there, when you have a really funny piece, it's like a lot of it is a self-deprecating humility in the voice of the narrator, and that is kind of like, I think, a really key to what you're talking about, authenticity and being vulnerable and having a like, wow, that's so dumb, like I'm so stupid, like that kind of attitude in telling the story, I think is key in making it really funny and having the reader buy into the authenticity of the narrator. And I think that's definitely a huge piece. And so, I mean, other I like thoughts on the voice on the voice of the narrator. Maybe we could talk about that and how you craft that in telling the story. Like I don't know, Anne, like we're kind of, you know, I'm obsessed with like stand up, and so and watching it and just like talking and watching how the comedians they do the timing, but they always kind of view themselves quite with a lot of humility, and they're basically making fun of themselves, right? Like most of the time, and that's what makes their humor so accessible. So
I think authenticity and love are connected. I think love is always the through line. So even if it's fiction, the characters that are most hateable, you as the writer have to approach them with love to make it resonant, even if they're the, you know, the butt of the joke. And I think that's what comics do, the comics I love. So Mike Birbiglia has a podcast called Working It Out. It is meta to this conversation. The whole conversation is about humor and the craft of humor. And it's not just stand-up. He's a storyteller who creates one-man shows, who, you know, on Broadway, all over the world. He tours all over the world. He's on This American Life. I mean, this is beautifully crafted humor beyond a joke. I listen to this all the time. He has incredible guests. If you haven't heard Tig Notaro's Grammy-winning show, when she literally got her cancer diagnosis and walked on stage and talked about it, no notes, and somebody had reported it, and it became a Grammy award-winning. You know, she won a Grammy for best whatever, I can't remember, but she's all of these comics. Mike Birbiglia is a cancer survivor who has a sleep disorder that's so severe that he once jumped through a second-story plate glass window at a Quality Inn. Sleepwalk with Me details that. But they write so beautifully about the everyday. So I think stand-up comedians, especially fabulous storytellers, show us the way. These are the kind of people who've devoted their entire professional lives to refining humor. They're so dedicated to practice. They constantly are getting up on stage. Like, not only are they writing, but they're constantly working in process. So Mike not only does this Working It Out podcast, but he does his show as he's working it out, which I think is incredible thought for writers.
Yeah, it's like doing your edits on stage. You're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it is, literally. And that's what David Sedaris does too, right? He makes notes in front of the audience because it's different every night and he learns. And the more we can take that approach with our writing, the better.
Yeah. Then I think I'll maybe both of you, you guys both are artists and practice other things. Can you maybe talk about like how writing comedy, and this is a parallel practice to other things that you're doing? Because I know, Anne, you're doing lots of different things, and also Allison, you're also a visual artist. So can you maybe speak to kind of the parallel practice and other forms of art that help like your writing practice?
Do you want to take that?
Allison, why don't you go? Why don't you
I'll go. So I have I'm a member of a couple of different writing groups, and I know a lot of people have parallel practices. I do have a friend who's very funny, and she's actually doing stand-up, and it's helped her essays, you know, just getting up. She's like, I can't believe I'm doing this, and I'm going to talk about these, like, you know, horrible things that happened in my childhood. And I've noticed her writing get much funnier. Other people collect things. I have been doing like collage art, and I started that after my mother died and had to clean out her house. And she was, well, she had a lot of things, lots and lots and lots of things. And one of the things she'd been doing was her own art, and I didn't realize it. And I've had this compulsion. I thought, I need to deal with my grief, but I don't want to deal with it in the traditional ways. So I started like taking her unfinished projects and all these photos and all this stuff. And literally, like, I just felt so angry and mad, and I couldn't put words to it. And the art allowed me, I was just ripping, cutting, pasting. It was like a dance. I would just kind of like get in this bizarre flow that I could never get in with my writing, because I arrive and I'm staring at the page and trying to make those words work. It's not working. It's not working. And the art, I didn't care. I had no expectations of ever, you know, trying to do anything with it. And so it's been really fun. And I find that when I get stuck with the writing, or I have expectations for it, it becomes less fun. And I can just say, you know what, I'm going to go put on my apron and kind of like get violent with some art supplies. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but that's us doing our craft, no matter what we're doing. Like, we have to show up, we have to practice. Like, even people who are athletes, like, we have some bad days, you know?
I love that. I love that, the parallel practice and putting it out there, putting something out there. It doesn't have to be writing. So, and go ahead and talk to us about, you have many things going on.
Well, I think we really helps our work if we can find ways to take ourselves less seriously.
Yes.
And if you can't, and I totally get it, if you can't do it in your writing, in your most important thing. So take a class in something that you can allow yourself to be terrible at and not care and just be silly. Like, I just wrote this piece about being a Muppet, but I saw that quote from Brett Goldstein that was going around. Maybe you saw it, that beautiful quote about, like, the Muppets, none of them are good at what they do. We love it, and we love them. We're never like, wow, Fozzie, that was really dumb joke. You know, like, that's why we love Fozzie. So finding ways to be a Muppet, whether it's in art, like, I've taken musical theater classes, I've taken like cabaret, I like to sing. Right now, I said yes to doing this podcast. It's pronounced memoir, because it's with two hilarious women I love. And every 2 weeks, we get on Zoom and we have a conversation about celebrity memoirs, and it's fun. And I can be ridiculous and I can be myself. And to me, there is no means to an end. It's built in fun and joy in my life. And if we can't find that as artists, our work, it is going to suffer.
I love that. So part of this talk is the Mapmakers Alumni Institute. It's a kind of a bridge to help writers in the larger community, not just at Pacific and the MFA program, connect with both people who are writers at large, writers in the wild, like yourselves. And in terms of like sharing some other craft specific techniques that you as prose writers use to kind of enhance the humorous aspects in your own writing, maybe. What are maybe one or two thoughts that you could help all of us who are in the program, who are in the program or who have graduated in the program, from the program, to help all of us kind of write funnier? I mean, we've talked about a couple of things like details, specificity, kind of taking serious, a different look, a different angle at really serious or grim moments. And the third is maybe a parallel practice. So what are some other strategies or crafts that can help all of us write funnier? That you could offer to the audience. Allison.
Okay.
Talk to us.
I think, I mean, Anne, you already touched on it. Looking at other art forms beyond writing, like we're always taught like read, do a close read, but watch the movie and literally like write down the dialogue, or write down, like if you think it's really funny or really clever, like what is actually happening on that scene in terms of their body language and how things fade in out, because that form is, and we're in the Renaissance right now, I think, of television. So if you can kind of capture that and then do that as a prompt, like, could I do a genius scene like that, borrowing from some other media? Other things, I think, and this is all available online, it's just, I read, it's like, okay, are there 7 types of humor, or 9 or 13? It doesn't really matter. And not all of them lend themselves well to prose. And that's probably because sometimes things are very, very funny when you listen on the radio, and it might not be funny, so read it out loud, but also really use your writing group. I think the feedback loop is key. And this is, I think, Anne, you would agree, this is why the comedians practice so much and like take it straight to an audience, because you can't quite know. I think it's hard. So that just takes some time, and give yourself a lot of grace. Other things you could do would just be like, just go crazy. If you're writing a nonfiction piece, well, like turn it into fiction, or like set it in, like totally change the scene and put it in a grocery store instead of the cemetery, or vice versa. Like, how does that change things? And you might be able to borrow some things and say, hey, that's really unexpected, and can really kind of add some levity or humor. But mostly just have fun. I mean, we're not here to tell you to get more serious in your writing, but I think one of the things that has been said in the past by serious writers is like, if you're writing funny, well, then you can't be serious. But we are serious, and it's a really high, like, great art form that you can be serious about by just trying all these different techniques.
I love it. And
I'm going to piggyback onto that and say, it also, you don't always have to be going for a laugh, right? So you can have a really serious topic and know, like, I just want to add one place where I'm going to add a little bit of lighter levity, and that can count as humor. It might be way too far a leap to be like, and then something hilarious happens, right? So it can just be a tiny place, like, how can I give the reader a little bit of a breath of fresh air? Another thing that comes to mind is when you're thinking about what's going on internally in yourself, if it's memoir or in your character that you have created, think about opposites and what could be going on outside of them that could be a very funny, diametrically opposed element for them to sort of have to react to. But really, I want to say that anybody who's in this program, I think shape and form really help the reader stay with you. And I think humor is something that can be added on, that can be learned. And it's really hard to go about it the other way, which is sort of how my writing practice began, which is going for funny without all the tools that I needed. So I just want to congratulate everyone who's here, and the dedication to learning is always going to help. Like, I think the biggest benefit for artists is if we can stay in that growth beginner's mind, it leaves our brains so much more open, and leaves for so much more possibility in our work. And then just also remembering like who the audience is. Some of my earlier humor, I was really trying so hard. And even though I accomplished some of those early goals, I think now that I'm looking back, it really wasn't my true voice. So I think that listening and learning from others, being really honest, approaching it with integrity, your characters or yourself with love and integrity, and then looking to where you can use just humanity's hilarious vulnerabilities, on top of a strong foundation. That's kind of what I think at this point in my life.
It's very wise and funny women, both of you. Thank you for participating. I think we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions in the Q&A, and I have a question here from Dana. I wonder what any of your thoughts are on the relationship of grief/struggle, humor, and social critique. Humor for social critique and social survival. I'm thinking of queer humor, Latinx humor, and how generational trauma along gender, race, sexuality appear in your work or work that you love. And she does give a book I read recently and love is Laughing Fit to Kill on Black Humor, Slavery, and More by Glenda Carpio. So I think humor as a way to survive, basically, as a way to cope. And I think some of my favorite authors are, are using humor to kind of cope, right? So I think that's something that is definitely one very, very key in terms of dealing with like very difficult events and like grief, struggle, survival. What are your thoughts on comedy as survival?
I think of R. Eric Thomas, who's an incredible playwright and writer, and you can subscribe to his newsletter. The name of his newsletter, oh, Here For It. But he's queer, he's African American, and he writes from this position in the world. He also is a storyteller and often MCs at the Moth in like the Baltimore, DC area. And he's loving and gentle at the same time, delivering social commentary and the reality of being a person in his position in the world. And it's hilarious and beautiful and moving. So that just came to mind.
It's called his name's R.
His name's R. Eric Thomas, and he writes everything. He writes memoir. He wrote a book about Maxine Waters. He's prolific and hilarious.
Check it out. It's called, and his podcast is called Here For It.
Oh, his newsletter is called Here For It.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Anne, you said it perfectly, but it's a thing that, and I've struggled with it too, because when we're bumping up against really tough topics that are just not funny, and you think, but why? Like, is there something wrong with me that I'm kind of moving? I'm surviving. I'm living, right? We've moved past some of these things, but my culture is saying there's like only a certain way we can talk about some of these really difficult things, and that's fine. But the reader still kind of wants a fresh take. And so I think no matter how dark the topic, how thorny, how difficult, how tough, if you as a writer can kind of say, hey, well, there might be like one other little thing we haven't considered, and it can be rooted in context, it can be rooted in some other kind of different experience. It doesn't have to discount the hard thing, whether that's a huge social issue or war, or some taboo. Like, there are a whole bunch of things that are just not funny. So it's really, I think, just putting the light against the dark. And kind of maybe thinking of it as an art form. I mean, this is what I think about too when I'm like doing my parallel practice. I'm like, ew, that got too dark. I cannot put that on the wall. Gotta, balance it.
No, and I think one thing that both of you kind of touched on, and I think is really key, is that we have to be having fun doing this. Like, that has to give joy and fulfillment and light in doing this, and because writing is really hard. So having a parallel practice doing other things helps, and writing funny is hard, right? So it's good to have a balance and to still have fun doing it. I don't see any other questions. If anyone, let's see, I think we asked the 2 questions that were here. And so I think we've come up to time. We're, 5 minutes to spare, and I think we're good. So thank you both for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and giving us some great authors and makers and creators to check out. Yeah. And thank you to Scott for organizing this. So wishing everyone at residency a safe trip home, and a great residency. And thank you to Anne and Allison.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott, for being our
Thanks,
tech
Scott.
guy. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone, for coming.
Thanks for checking us out. Okay. All the
Okay,
best.
take care. Bye.
Bye.